That's the second panel. We had a very interesting first panel this morning, and Raoul, who organized both panels, will start by summarizing perhaps the conversation we had this morning, and then we start the second part of this conversation with that we have called a practitioner. Oh, you said that this morning. And we will have some flavor from Germany. But Raoul will be from Quebec, not from Germany, so that we will balance Europe, two from Europe and two from from America. So Raoul, if you could summarize what was the discussion this morning, the key questions, and then we start the next round.
So I'll embark on the daunting task to combat the soup coma and get people back into the activities this afternoon. And this morning we had some lofty metaphors with Batman and Robin fighting the good fight. Over lunch we descended then into some pessimism, and we were stuck with the image of Marvin, the chronically depressed robot from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But we'll try to pick it back up into the sphere of the superheroes. So we had a couple of guiding questions this morning in the first panel. One was the nature of political action by trade unions, and there was a pretty clear plea for more clarity, for a clear, should I say, narrative. So we agreed, I would say, that trade unions themselves, in developing their political action, need to be defining and agreeing on principles, and then sticking to them and messaging those principles in a clear and concise way. And the second basket of questions was around the relevance of political parties, and trade unions should, or how should they collaborate with political parties. And so there was one part of this question obviously referring to the more natural allies, social democratic parties, and there was a nice metaphor there developed of sort of a quiet divorce that has happened over the last decades, and whether it would not be maybe a better idea to start throwing some cups and plates and mix it up and discuss what is not working in that marriage. But one other thought I want to bring to this panel is there was the question around the Green parties, and questions around a message around sustainability and fighting climate change and saving the planet, and whether there's a narrative there that trade unions, together with Green parties and together maybe with red-green type governments and movements, could embark upon. There was a bit of a discussion around new actors and new phenomena in politics that trade unions could mobilize or get behind. There was a report from the US where ballot measures are an interesting phenomenon, where people who are not usually involved either in political parties or in trade unions get quite excited about issues that matter to people, and trade unions could very much mobilize this. There was a bit of a discussion, and it connects well with the other themes in this conference, around the disruption that the digital economy is posing, the platform economy is posing. So, for example, the Uber drivers, and how trade unions can work with taxi drivers and others, obviously, to address some of these concerns around the digital and platform economies. Finally, so we had a brief discussion, but maybe we'll discuss this a little bit more now with the colleagues from Germany. Why is it that right-wing populists have all of the false and easy answers to very difficult questions, and how, and this connects back maybe to my first comment about framing and messaging, and how can both trade unions and progressive parties well, not replicate the false and easy answers, but hopefully come up with some concise and concrete messaging to block and push back against this right-wing populism, this wave that we're seeing in the political landscape. And maybe one of the conclusions or one of the points that was made was that it sure can't be helpful when right-wing populist governments are proposing some progressive or what used to be worker or social democratic agenda points. If they're setting the agenda with social democratic or policy items, then certainly left-wing parties and trade unions have a problem. So that's, I would say, what I could bring back from this morning. And yes, we have 3 participants. Our 4th participant, unfortunately, was struck by a health-related problem. So we have 2 colleagues from Germany, KnutLambertin from the German Trade Union Confederation. We have Nils Hindersmann from the German Trade Union of Chemical Workers, Mining and Energy. And we have Fred Wilson from Unifor, who is also heading up the North American Solidarity Project. And they will report on their experiences from the front lines, but not necessarily in that order. So I'll turn it back to Philippe, and you will obviously direct them.
Okay. Thank you, Raoul, for this very good summary of this lively conversation we had this morning. So now we have a different perspective, the German perspective. And I think the German perspective is rather interesting when we look at the different possibilities of repertoire, because generally, even in Europe, we have the feeling or the image that the trade unions all is okay in Germany because they have still power, they discuss with the political parties. But when you see the figure, it's something much more contrasted. The trade unions in Germany are losing members every year, and they are now around 18, 17. And if you remember, the French, when they had 10% or 8%, kind of disaster. But the Germans are continuing to go down, and there is no stop. The French stop at around 8, 10, and had kind of were flat since there. But the Germans continue to decrease. And the DGB declare to have lost 100,000 members to the ETUI the last 2 years. Not only that, the coverage of the collective bargaining is also declining. And that's they are now more or less below 50%. So 1 worker on 2 is not covered by collective bargaining in Germany. Certainly not in the metal sector, but in other sectors there are really holes and gaps on the coverage. So that's a rather interesting case and contrasting case with some very strong part and some very weak part. And I think that when we have to think about the repertoire and what is next, it's interesting to see that in a country you have so contrasting situation depending on the sector. So we will start with kind of, I suppose, a broader view from the DGB. That's the covering all the sector. And Knut, you are the first. Thank you again.
Thank you, Philippe. I want to give you an example. Our theme is the renewal of the trade union political action repertoire. It's a question of the future of policy of alliances. And the next question is, with whom to build up alliances? I want to give you a short example. In 2005, the Social Democrats and the Greens abolished the equal contribution for employers and employees for the statutory health insurance funds. That means today that the distribution loss for the workers of over 100 billion euros in 13 years. It's a lot of money. We have fought against the law since the legislation in 2004. First step was to ask the usual suspects for build up an alliance, the social movement and so on, and it was not very successful. And the second step, we asked the Catholic workers' organizations, who are very close to the Conservative Party, to support our fight against the abolition of equal contributions to the statutory health insurance funds, and yeah, it worked. Next year, and now we have a coalition between the Conservatives and the Social Democrats. The Catholic workers' organizations brought support to the Conservative support in the Conservative Party. We changed the opinion of the Social Democrats, and now in this kind of coalition, we will have in the next year again equal contributions for employers and employees. That means for me, my opinion is we have to build up new alliances and we have to formulate touchstones, new touchstones to bind ourselves, to orient ourselves. The first is the target group, employees, that must be shared. It's only successful with regard to the content. Another touchstone is not ideological, not anti-union, but successful. And success is for the workers, for our members, the most important criteria. And I think let's discuss about alliances with Social Democrats or Socialists, but with the Conservatives in the interest of workers.
Okay, then, thank you. I have just a question of clarification. Because when you were speaking about the Christian trade union, is the Christian trade union within the DGB or the small yellow trade union?
No trade union. It's,
no trade.
Other Catholic workers' organizations, Kolping. I don't know if in North America Kolping is active. It's a European issue, I think. And there's another more left-wing Catholic workers' organization, the Catholic Workers' Movement, but they are not trade unions.
Okay.
They accepted the DGB, or the German Confederation of Trade Unions, as the trade union confederation.
I think it helps to clarify that what kind of alliance. I have a second question, if you agree, because you were speaking about a rather traditional alliance between the SPD and the CSU-CDU, but what about the Green? Do you have some idea, because the last election in Bavaria, they had twice the size of the SPD. So perhaps they are the future. And we discussed also this morning, and somewhere rather vocal about that we need to take care about climate change, sustainability, and that's the discourse of the Green. So is the alliance going to the Green?
No, I don't think so. But it's not a simple question, because in history, the founding of the Greens were very was some kind of left-wing project, left-wing from the Social Democrats. But the Greens in Germany are changing. The income of Green supporters rise and rise, and the old socialist or left-wingers left the party, and a new generation of successful liberal people enter the functions. And so I'm not sure if the Greens will be an ally for the trade unions in the future, but we have a strong labor movement or workers group still in the Greens. One of my responsible chairwoman is a member of the Green Party, and the chairman of the second largest member union is Green too, but I don't think that there will be a stand for the Greens in the future anymore.
Okay, that's at least clear. And yes.
I mean, just a follow-up question. Could you explain that with policies? Are they not in favor?
Oh, we need. Sorry, you need just the mic because it's recorded, but I don't know where is the mic.
Je pense qu'on devrait faire les trois présentations en premier.
Je sais.
Ouais, tu veux prendre quelques questions?
We take just one question and then we go to the next presentation. But
yeah, I was just wondering if you could explain your position with regards to the Green Party. We all know kind of where they stand in terms of environmental policies, but where do they stand more in terms of labor market policies or strengthening of trade union or works council legislation? And if you could explain from that angle.
But you have to give the mic back, so sorry.
It's a problem with the mic.
Yeah, normally we have two mics, but okay, or you can use the other one.
I try to give a kind of philosophical answer, but I try to give you a short answer. There, on the local and on the federal or the state level, the Greens don't support union fights or union aims so much. Sometimes it's anti-union on the local or the state level, and and now I must give you a large example. The trade unions in Germany are the founding or the employers' organization and the employees' organizations in Germany are the main organizations that found the social insurance system. We have some kind of self-administration in the social insurances. The Greens don't support this kind of self-administration anymore. It's one example. It's not a coherent policy, but I think in the future it becomes more and more difficult with the Greens because the interests, the economic interests of the supporters, of the voters for the Greens goes away from the workers. Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We will have the general debate after. I think that's just one or two questions of clarification. But so we will move the other side. You can have this mic of the ocean, and we go for Fred, coordinator of the Solidarity Project.
Right. Well, thank you. Yes, I'm from Unifor, and so from Germany to Canada. If you were to ask what is new in the repertoire of labor politics in Canada, I would suggest with a little bit of modesty that really what is new in Canada on the labor side is Unifor, which is a new union, the newest national union in Canada, only 5 years old, but which was formed to be a new type of union and to do things differently, and it has. And most of the mainstream labor movement is not very happy about that. And how could I tell you what's different about Unifor's politics? I would say that Knut has just captured that quite well in the way that he described how they worked to restore funding to their health insurance fund by using alliances, and we're acting independently and putting labor's interests first and dealing with the political actors accordingly. So I don't want to take up the time in my introduction about the North American Solidarity Project, but it is an extension, in a sense, of Unifor's new union project to the cross-border, to progressive unions in the United States. And one of the things that brings us together is a shared analysis of what we call broken models for the labor movement. And there's a number of them, from organizing to servicing, and primary among them are politics. So what do we mean by what's broken in our political model in the North American labor movement? Well, there's lots, but I would suggest to you that there are two main things. First, in spite of the divorce that's been mentioned, the sort of unsettled divorce, the very, very persistent idea in the trade union movement that you can contract out, in effect, your politics to social democratic or democratic parties, and that you can do this year after year with the hope that the political success of those parties will somehow trickle down. And it is kind of a trickle-down politics, that it will sort of trickle down to the conditions of work of our members and to worker rights in the context of a changing economy. It simply just hasn't happened. Hasn't happened. And there's no indication that it's going to happen anytime soon. The second part of that model is that within that model, the inability of our unions in North America to put worker rights on the axis of political choice. In other words, to make worker rights any kind of meaningful ballot issue in the outcome of politics. We have not been able to do that, with some few exceptions. So I'd like to just try to illustrate this with a current example that's really fresh for us. Anybody here from Ontario? A couple people. I'd like to just sort of illustrate what I'm talking about with a very brief history of worker rights in Canada's largest jurisdiction, Ontario, the province, directly to the west of us for those from outside of Canada. So if you were to go back 6 or 7 years ago, to the genesis of when we formed Unifor, Ontario was ground zero in what you could call a perfect storm, where we had just elected a very, very hostile anti-labor government federally, a majority government for the Stephen Harper government, with a virulent anti-labor program. And the government in waiting, the opposition party that was expected to win the election in Ontario, had as its central campaign to remove the RAND formula in Ontario. to outlaw the RAND formula, which is the basis of union security, a form of Canadian right-to-work legislation. And also in that year, 2011, we had just seen right-to-work legislation come to Ontario's borders in Michigan and in Wisconsin. So it was the perfect storm. Partly because of the new impact of Unifor, which had just been created, not exclusively, but we had a big role. We were able, in that election, to make those anti-labor proposals a ballot box issue. And we did so without help from our social democratic allies. Without their help. We nevertheless made those anti-labor issues a ballot box issue. The Conservatives were defeated. A Liberal government was elected. And the dialectic, if I could use that expression, of that defeat of the right led to a labor law reform process towards more enhanced worker rights. I was deeply involved in that for 2 years. I can tell you that we did that without any help from our traditional allies, who saw any gains that we would have made as contrary to their partisan interests. So we did it on our own. And ultimately, we did get a new labor laws in the province of Ontario, which arguably made, for a brief period of time, Ontario the most pro-worker jurisdiction in North America, at least. I won't go in the discussion. If you're interested in the features of that, we can go into what was there, including higher minimum wages and generally worker rights. Last May, Ontario went back, had another election, and we elected a dangerous right-wing populist. Some people have said he's a Donald Trump, but not quite as smart. Okay? Again, our traditional allies celebrated the defeat of the previous government because they became the leader of the opposition. We were not celebrating in Unifor. That Social Democrats were in the opposition because we knew what was about to happen. There was nothing for us to celebrate. This week, on Monday of this week, less than 5 months later, almost all of the significant gains we made were repealed. They'll go through the formality of the votes, but the legislation, they have the majority, they're gone. Okay? So, I guess what I would say to you is that Ontario shows that worker rights hangs by a thread. Hangs by a thread. And in the United States, our friends there have now faced the consequences of the Supreme Court decisions that are called Janus, which basically means that libertarian free speech rights trump the collective rights of workers in the United States. And although our Supreme Court in Canada has taken a different position, conservative politicians in Canada have those same libertarian arguments at the core of their agenda, and whenever and as soon as they take power, they will legislate accordingly. They will legislate it. But meanwhile, and I guess this is the point I would leave you with as my introduction to our discussion today. The problem with our model is that the mainstream of the labor movement continues to sleepwalk in the old model of contracting out politics and simply expecting and hoping that somehow the return to power of social democrats will solve our problem. The last 5 years in Ontario demonstrates that that is a very sketchy and misplaced hope. And it's time for us to act and do things differently. And that's what our North American Solidarity Project is about, helping to bring about. So I will leave it there, and I look forward to the discussion.
Okay. I have certainly a completely stupid question because I know very little about Ontario, a little bit more about Quebec. But what I do not really understand, because your argument is saying we have not to be linked to political parties, let's say ballot, less organized, but the political parties still exist and they won the election. So what do you want to do at the end of the day? Do you want to have another party? Do you have no party? To say that that's just, you don't care about the election? Because your story, if I read your story, you had you won the first battle with the ballot, but then the system remained the same. And then the system remaining the same, you lost the second round. But what do you want to do with the system? You want that the trade union movement change? You want that the Social Democrat and PD change? Or you want the liberal? Or you want to have something different? But if we have election, we have parties, and that's something I didn't fully understand in the strategy, if I may.
Certainly. Well, in the shorthand, something was lost in the shorthand of trying to get it in my only 3 or 4 minutes. But the difference between the 2014 election and the 2018 election, in 2014 we were able to make the ballot box issue worker rights. And we won that election, and on the basis of that, we were able, with a government that was elected to a significant degree with the support of our members, and we were able then to actually advance worker rights. And the point I was making is it was done without the traditional fulcrum of just our traditional alliance with the Social Democrats. In 2018, worker rights was not the central issue. The labor movement had again retreated to the traditional model of simply supporting unconditionally the Social Democratic Party, which did not win the election, and within months we suffered this huge setback. So what's the difference? What do we want? We want the labor movement to engage in a robust way in independent labor politics, to set the agenda, to make the ballot box question, and on that basis, if we had done that in 2018, we could have had a very different outcome. I hope that's clearer.
Okay, well, thank you. So we return to Germany. But another sector, the chemical sector, but it is broader than just chemical, but it's an important one. So thank you for coming, and you have the floor. Nils.
Well, thank you, Philippe. To give you a brief introduction of my, very brief introduction of my organization helps maybe to understand what our challenges, our political challenges are at the moment. My organization is a member-based organization with 640,000 members in the chemical, the mining, and the energy industry. And this organization is facing challenges because we are kind of representing the traditional industrial sector of Germany. Meaning, for instance, we got companies like Bayer, who just bought Monsanto. We have issues going on there, and this already gives you a kind of a illustrated example maybe of what our challenges are with the Green Party. And then we have the industry, the energy industry linked with the mining. Basically, we took a lot of efforts in Germany to bring renewable energy to the market and to raise the share of renewable energy in the power market. And this is really great development. But on the other hand, we have to admit that prices for energy, for electricity went up also. But we are still highly dependent on coal as a major carrier for electricity. And the thing is that this year, we stop the coal mining in Germany. So this year, the last ton of coal has been brought out of a mine, and it will stop. Does the electricity business, the energy business, stop burning coals for energy? No, not. Because we're importing coal from other countries. From countries where we have less worker rights, where we have more problems with how coal is actually been mined. Another challenge. And we have right now going on a debate because we also have the brown coal. It's a different type of coal, which is a lot more producing a lot more carbon dioxide than actually coal is the usual coal will do. And this brings us also to problems because we are an organization which says, yes, we have climate change, and yes, we have to stick to the goal of reducing the rise of the temperature, the overall global temperature, by 2 degrees. And we have to take more efforts in order to achieve these goals. This is what we are saying. But this is challenging us because we know that we have to reduce the share of brown coal energy in the primary energy market, meaning that the jobs we have there will probably drop and get lost on the way. But the debate now going is the debate, where the political debate we're having there is of how we're going to organize this process and how we sort of care for those workers so that they are not just losing their job and lose some kind of perspective. So this is 2 big challenges we are facing with our members at the moment. Brings a lot of challenge to the debate with the Green Party, at least for my organization. And another thing what is taking place is that we asked our 640,000 members 2 years ago about their political opinion and how they are happy with the political development and what their needs and what their opinion is on many big issues. Good news is that that the vast majority of our members are sort of in the center, so not rather left center, left liberal, you would say, I guess, in the Northern American way. But they are the center of society with their opinion, with their political values and opinion. But we have a rising number of people who are attracted by right-wing parties with clear or seem to be clear answers when it comes to climate change, when it comes to coal mining, as I just said, because they are taking the position there is no climate change, and this is why we can run on coal for forever. And this might attract people also from my organization saying, okay, this is a very easy answer, and maybe this is better than this more complicated answer given by Green Party, by Social Democrats, and also by our sort of main policy as a union at the moment. So this is just an example to show you what the difficulties are. And when it comes to fighting right-wing extremism or right-wing political opinion, we are very clear on that as an organization as well. But it also stresses our organization because we have more and more members actually challenging the leadership of our organization also on the question of, is this the right way? Is this the right way to sort of stick to Social Democrats, stick to Green Party, stick to the party which is open for labor movement within the Conservatives, or isn't it better for us and our industry to stick with the far right and maybe join them in their discussion? This is a debate taking place. It's not the vast majority. It's a small group, but it's there. And this is what sort of describes the situation we are in at the moment. And this makes it, that makes it difficult for us to sort of find the right policy line and to find new alliances with Greens and Social Democrats in order to get things done, solved, and in a manner that our members are still saying, okay, this you really took care of this problem.
Okay, thank you. I have a question that perhaps could be useful to clarify that. How you defined AFD, the extreme right or the populist one? Because there is a discussion, and we had the discussion this morning, that the problem with the populists in many countries are that they are sometimes more on the left than the social democrat when you speak about social policy. And I gave the example, the piece in Poland, when the trade unions came for negotiating the increase of the minimum wage. The government said, okay, I will give you more that you ask. And then the trade unions were lost, because they didn't know what to do with a government which was populist, giving 10% more in increase. As far as I know, it's not at all the case, or they are more liberal than kind of social. But could you perhaps give your opinion? And I think it's important for the rest of the debate, as we have two speakers from Germany, that we have your opinion. You know much better than us, at least than me.
Well, on the social issue, they're quite unconcrete at the moment. They are debating about what kind of pension system they want to have for Germany. On many issues coming to labor law, they are rather, I would say, liberal as well. They would say, okay, we need to get rid of co-determination, workers' council, and these things. They're quite clear on that, but not as clear as we would wish to have in order to sort of get more our members involved in taking action against that. So they are rather unclear on what they want in the labor sector, but they're quite clear on the question of migration. And this is where people also, it's an easy answer, is that, okay, our jobs might be threatened by millions of migrants coming to Germany and sort of offering cheap labor, and that brings us under pressure. This is some very easy sort of argument brought up by this party, and this is what members also of my organization say, maybe this is not wrong. And so this is an issue for them, where they are saying, okay, maybe the traditional way of sort of sticking to social democrats, Greens, and so on, didn't help us. Didn't help us much. So let's see if this kind of policy might stop migration, and then we don't have to fear any perspectives and the perspective for the economy going down and so on. So that's basically how I would say what mainly dominates the debate about AFD. It's basically the question of migration and how much this migration will actually sort of put a challenge on perspective of the economic well-being at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Raoul?
Can I respond to
my
colleague?
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Apparently, they all disagree. So that's let's have a debate.
I don't want to debate my German colleagues. I just want to maybe give a different perspective, which is, when we talk about right-wing populism, we should not forget that it begins with right-wing. It's a right-wing populism that we face. I'm not as familiar with the actual policies of the, of the AFD in Germany and so on, or Le Pen in France or whatever. But from the North American context, one of the problems with contracting out labor's politics to so-called traditional allies, who are very partisan and are mostly concerned with their own electoral competition with liberals, mostly concerned with them. And our whole experience over the past while is that if you have a party that says the worst outcome for the country could be the best outcome for us, i.e. we could gain and become the opposition, even though a far-right government could be elected, and that's an acceptable outcome because it's progress for us. We say, anytime we have a political party that says that the worst for workers is the best for them, we have a problem with that party. But the consequence of that is that in the right-wing populism is appealing to our members, and if the trade union movement does not step forward to that battlefield against the right-wing populism in the working class, close to our workplaces, in working class communities. If we don't do that decisively and strongly, who will? Who will do it? Which means an uncompromising position by labor on equity, on human rights, an uncompromising position on those issues, which is important to do it. And labor stepping up its economic battles so that working people do see a champion, which they have abandoned other political parties, traditional political parties, because they weren't seen as enough of a champion of their economic interests. Again, our role to be seen as that champion and to oppose right-wing populism in the working class. I am very, very worried that if we fail that task, the 21st century progress that we had hoped to see will be a return to the early 20th century revanchism and racism and intolerance, and labor rights, worker rights, we will lose trade union freedoms in that context. Do we have any doubt about that?
Okay. Knut.
Okay, yeah, it's not easy for English-speaking people. I can understand Fred's disappointment. Sometimes I feel so too. But my example was not meant that there's no chance to cope with the Social Democrats. In Europe or in Germany, the neoliberal ideology fell into the Social Democrats after breakdown of the Soviet Union, etc., etc., etc. And as a result of this fact, they made and still make mistakes. But we couldn't change the legislation about the fees for the health insurance funds when we couldn't change the Social Democrats. But it was the second issue to change the larger partner in the coalition, the Christian Democrats, the conservatives. And I think, yeah, there was a divorce between the trade union movement and the social democratic movement in Germany. But it's like Richard Burton and Liz Taylor. You can marry again. Try it.
How many times? 7? Something like that. Okay, I had a question somewhere.
I agree with you.
Okay, then. One question is on the same topic, I suppose? Okay, 2 questions. Okay, that's the... And then we have the Quebec, because Raoul want to add the Quebec dimension, but we have the two questions at least, and then let's see, we allow for answer.
I'll try in English. My question is for Fred Wilson. I wasn't there this morning, so I don't want to make you repeat things that have been said, but I wonder, why was Doug Ford elected? Why was Ford elected in Ontario if the preceding government voted betterments for the working class? So it makes me wonder what happened. So and you say that the labor movement wasn't able to put the agenda of the working class interest on the the election agenda. So why was it that it wasn't possible? And it makes me think of what happened here in Quebec. We were in the past always, and we still were in this election placed in the situation where we are called by some to choose to make a strategic vote, and this was, I think, a wrong politic for many years. But we had the surprise of electing, I don't know how many they were, of Québec Solidaire. It was a surprise, even if I live in Quebec City. Woo! And it was supposed to be the place where it was least possible, and there were two. So I'm surprised and very happy. But it's because many people didn't choose to make this strategic vote of choosing the least, le moins pire. How do you say that in English?
The lesser evil.
Okay. And people voted not for the lesser evil, but what they wanted to. So I wonder, I'm very interested in your opinion about what trade unions should do. Should they just say generally what are workers' interests and choose among the different parties which one is the best on your opinion, or should they say you should vote for this party because of that? So, well, I would like to know your opinion on that. Thank you.
So that's the okay, that's normally I'm sharing like a German, but no, I think I'm sharing like an Italian. It's a little bit messy. So I give you the floor for the question, and I return to my German chairman, and I will give the floor then to the last speaker. But you have the question. As the questions are complicated, you have 5 minutes more to think a short answer.
I have less a question than a comment to Knut. I mean, I think it's the German parliament. We had in the past 3 parties, and the unions relied on the Social Democrats and partly on the social wings of the Conservative Party. This will not work anymore. We have now at least 6 parties in the parliament, and the 2 parties, and probably it's the last time that the big coalition has a majority. So the unions really have to think about political coalitions differently, and I don't see any future for any ambitious political project of the unions in Parliament if they don't do this. And the Greens are one element. They have to be formed. Of course, I see all the tensions, the problems, but I can also enumerate many problems with the Social Democrats. It's true that the Greens are very weak in social issues. They don't have the staff. They have a few deputies in Parliament who are quite good, well informed. You can rely on them, and I know that the unions are closely connected to these people. And I wondered why the Left Party was not mentioned. I mean, the crisis of the Social Democratic Party is partly also a reason because many people don't see any vision of change anymore, and therefore we need to have a red-green vision of coalition, and I think that is the only chance for big political projects in Germany.
Okay, let's complex a little bit the situation with the Quebec case, and then we return to what seems to me at the core of the debate, the kind of link with the parties. Okay, but you okay.
Thank you for asking the question, because the even more recent election, after the Ontario election being the Quebec election, I think there's also some tactics or measures that were tried by the labour movement, including the libéral caquiste, where essentially there was a campaign likening the outgoing liberal government with the right-wing populist runner-up, or the one that was leading in the polls, which is now elected, and which has they have a lot of the same economic type of policies, and that was rightfully pointed out by the labour movement. And I think it brings us back to the question of how do we frame things and how do we create ballot questions, because this this was very early on in the campaign that got a bit of traction, a bit of coverage. But as the campaign went on, and it was not a particularly exciting or mobilizing campaign, I think there was a bit of a disengagement with the electoral process to begin with. Then it went into other questions, and of course the question of immigration. And in that sense, the Quebec example is very much an in-between example, right, between the European case and the other North American cases. So the particular brand of right-wing populist government that was elected in Quebec, on economic and social policy, may be relatively undistinguishable from what I would consider right-wing liberal government that was defeated, but certainly there was a marked difference on question of integration and immigration, which sounds a lot more like the type of mobilization tactics and strategies that are being used by European right-wing populists. So that's certainly one thing to keep in mind. So as the labor movement is doing electoral strategy, because this is electoral strategy, this is not necessarily political action. I think this is another lesson from all this. So as the labor movement is thinking about electoral action, the question of framing ballot questions, helping some political actors frame ballot questions that are useful to progressive forces, that's certainly one thing to keep in mind. In Quebec, it was very different from the Ontario case. The ballot question to avoid was immigration and integration, and that didn't really happen. I think it goes back to the other item, which is what do we do between elections, right? What do we do? So we have an electoral strategy, hopefully. Maybe it's strategic vote, maybe it is pushing some issue to become the electoral ballot question, but there's 4 years in between. And I think a lot of the things that were mentioned this morning, we're going a little bit deeper. We're asking the question, what type of work can be done with the trade union members to develop a coherent political action as a trade union movement? And that is difficult as well, because there's differences of opinion, of course. It may involve instances of fighting with various political actors in the political arena, but it might very well be unavoidable. So the idea of a red-red-green mandate or project in the German context might be something that is worthwhile, but it is not a project that can be done as an electoral strategy. There needs to be a build-up and a work towards that in between election. Otherwise, if the critical mass isn't there, and I would see the same thing for any type of red-green alliances in North America, because the conflict between ecological ideas and social democratic forces can be seen anywhere, right? I mean, in British Columbia, there's a red-green government right now. It's holding quite well around certain agreed upon issues like electoral reform, for example, but might very well blow apart over questions of liquid natural gas or water power or whatever. It can't be guaranteed that these types of coalitions and common platforms are actually sustained.
Okay, if you agree, I will just check if there is no other question. I know that you have already a lot to answer, but I think it's important that everyone can participate. So you will agree on that. Okay, it's going the other direction. Is there someone else who want to? Yes, sure. So I propose that we take all, because we have 20 minutes, so we take all the questions, so yes, 3. So you can answer the most important, if we have too many.
It's a very short question for the German members of the panel. Whether they see any reason for optimism in the Aufstehen movement. I can see by their faces.
I'm still, I'd like to follow up on the question that you asked, because I'm still wondering what labor issues were on the ballot box in 2014 that you seem to have alluded to, and how did that not happen in 2018? That's the central question I think you tried to ask, because if we're to understand power, I don't know that labor had power either in 2014 or in 2018, but maybe you can address that.
Okay, that's next. then here, is there anyone? We go this direction, so that's it. If there is someone between you and you, that's just raise your hand.
Thank you. I don't know if it fits into the plan of the discussion topic, but as it happens, I'm also from Germany. I'm also dealing with trade union stuff. And I mean, we have talked a lot about the German context and the Canadian one, and I would like to shed, at least for some seconds or minutes, the light on the European context, because I think it's you cannot really you have to view both dimensions together, the national one and the European one. Like 1 year ago, there was some kind of political movement initiative. I don't even know what kind of. Yeah, there was some kind of political initiative coming from the eastern part of Europe, voicing all of a sudden things like, we want to turn back the brain drain, we want to have fair wages, we want good social policies, like very acceptable aims. And they were all coming from, or the persons behind these ideas came from Poland, from the Peace Party, from Fidesz in Hungary, and from, I think, from Lithuania, from some right-wing populist movement. You probably have heard of them. So I think this was the kind of not welcome response on the faults and mistakes that were consequently made in the European Union in the past decades. And to be honest, I think this movement is not that big and not that important that it might threaten Europe for the next parliamentary elections. But it shows us one thing, that it's not enough to just focus on the question how trade unions might handle this on the national context. You have to look above the borders. You have to see how the dynamics and evolvements of capitalism that led to companies only offering precarious jobs in Eastern Europe, of millions of young people going to different countries for studying there, threatening the social security systems and the whole financial stability of all of these countries, now leads to this kind of right-wing populism statement. And these countries will not be able to answer these political questions by themselves because they were not they are not made by themselves. They come from the broader interconnection of capitalism, of how the economics works in Europe and in the whole Western world. And yeah, I just want to add that it is necessary to point the view above borders, and European trade unions do that. But of course, it's not just about European trade unions; it's about international trade union movements.
Thank you. That's I think a very interesting point, because it's all the situation in Europe is so complex. Because what's happening? That people from Lithuania, from Bulgaria are leaving the country. So there are 10 countries in 2015 that will have the worst situation in demography. On the 10, 9, 8 are from Eastern Europe. And so that's what is your project? If you are in Bulgaria, you had at the independence from the Russian 12,000, and in few decades you will have half the population. So that's kind of new scene and some hope that the populists say, okay, but we should attract people, and then to attract people you should increase the pension or reduce the pension age and increase the wage. And that's why also they try to have less migration outside of their country, and they rethink what was their kind of software before. Okay, we will take the job having a kind of cheap labor. It's no longer, because cheap labor people go to UK or they go to US or Australia because they will have more, and the brightest are going. So it's kind of very complex situation when you you mixed social, migration, and national. But there is a last question. That's just the mic has to move 20 meters. Thank you. From this side, no question.
It's just a brief question. It was earlier mentioned the historic and quite dramatic decline of the SPD, and the SPD obviously has been one of the important parts of the labor movement in Germany. Why do you think the SPD is doing so poorly in the federal election, but also in the state elections?
Thank you.
Okay, no other no other question. So I propose we start with Knut and we go this way, if you do agree.
Yes, now I'm taking breath. Why? Yeah, different reasons. Lot of false distribution policy. The income. The income situation of the working class. They haven't got so much profit from the wealth, development of wealth as the rich part of the society. The persons, wrong persons, some kind of elite that doesn't have any contact to the base of the party, and no strategy. The Social Democratic Party have no strategy for the society in present and future. There are enough reasons. These three, I think so. About Aufstehen, yeah. Because of the fact that I think that the party Die Linke, the left, Gerhard remains, that I think it's a kind of social democratic party, but because of the history, the spread of the persons are very wide. And I don't see any leading person from the trade union movement in Aufstehen. So I don't see any success for this try. Yeah, but the future is unwritten, to quote a former punk band called The Clash. The future is unwritten. I'm a trade union officer and not a prophet. It's another job, but I think to learn from the history, my part is to take a view from the past and throw it in the future. Maybe there are less natural allies for the trade union movement in the future than in the. But if that's a fact, then we have to build up or to strengthen former partners, former allies. There's what does Margaret Thatcher said? There's no alternative.
Okay, I show you a graph. So that's the graph is coming from the S&D, so the socialists themselves. So that's the decline in 10 years of the socialists in Europe. As you say, there is just one country. They were stable, and if we go up, you have also that's the election from the post-war, and then they were very stable. They have a lost in the 80s, and then a big drop, and that's the situation. In a way, doesn't mean that perhaps we will have a miracle and they will have less, but that's the situation in Europe. And that's too optimistic because the result of the election in Germany, France, and the Netherlands were worse than foreseen. So the graph is before having the election. Just say that in France the Socialist Party has disappeared, in the Netherlands has disappeared, in Poland doesn't exist. That's the reality of the allies of the trade union in some countries. Okay, that's the...
Yeah, maybe to go on the question of why we are not so much looking for allying with the left-wing party or with the Greens more. For the Green Party, I just said that at the moment, because in the couple of years before, we tried to improve our relation with the Green German Party a lot. Yeah, we used to sort of, have a very difficult relation with the Green Party, but it started to improve in the last years. We talked to them a lot, and also we were sort of changing our approach towards carbon dioxide reduction and policies fostering that. So that was the point. Until now, we are having this sort of huge debate going on at the moment of closing down mines where people are working, and one of the leader of the Green Party just said that it would be better to have unemployed people than having the overall temperature rising by 2 degrees or more. And then it's for a trade union very hard to explain to the members that they're not sort of kind of having the same value as the issue of climate change. And this makes it for a trade union very hard to then try to sort of find a better relation with the Green Party in the end. But I also would agree that in the end there are not so many sort of left-wing movements or parts in the parliament left that we can allow us to not, talk to them on that issue. With the left wing, the left party in Germany, it's also quite difficult because we have many issues where we would say, okay, they are. Might not be that kind of reliable partner when it comes to real politics, when we actually want to change something, because this movement, in our view, mainly depends on being in opposition and confronting the government, which all goes wrong. And so basically saying, what we say is rather a movement of no-sayers than actually yes-sayers, or to sort of enrich the debate about some more constructive things, how to move on. And this makes them not so as a strong allied in politics and in policy perspectives than the other left-wing parties. This is maybe an explanation why we as an organization are rather focused on social democrats, conservatives, or social wing of conservatives and the Green Party rather than the left. But it turns out that maybe this is not the right strategy at the moment. We have to look at it. But and when it comes to the question of why is Social Democrats, why are they declining as well? Hard to answer that question. I think there is a huge sort of misunderstanding, because actually this government brings things forward, also things we have been asked and campaigning for. Knut just mentioned that we had the Social Democrats changing their opinion on this equal contribution between employers and employees for the public insurance fund for health. But there are other issues like pensions and so on where we actually got our things done. We had a huge campaign a couple of years ago that we wanted to have a minimum wage administration in Germany as well. This was only possible with the Social Democrats in the end. So there is policy been done which is in favor of labor movement, which is sort of supporting us, but in the end it doesn't turn out for the party. So there must be a reason why it doesn't work. And that's very hard to say, very difficult in the end. I would also agree that there's obviously a kind of sort of communication problem of what has been done and what is sort of the goal, the overall goal, and where's the vision, where's the strategy. And it's also the question of persons, that the persons who are sort of are there for many, many years, some of them are new, but if you look at their careers, I mean, they spend most of their life in parliaments, and so they are not sort of as a reliable and accountable, seen as an accountable and reliable partner. And this makes it maybe also hard then to sort of convince people that they are in favor of labor policy, of better social care and all these things. They're doing that maybe because they might win the election with this idea, but it's not really sort of convincing in the end. And this is why Social Democrats are still losing votes on basically doing policies which tend to go in the right direction when it comes to a labor law and what we actually expect from them.
Okay, Fred.
Okay. Well, again, from Germany to Canada, I think there's two questions that I've identified, two big questions that I've identified to myself and through me to Unifor's perspective. The first is, if we say it's time to stop contracting out our politics to so-called traditional allies, then what? What is our proposal? And I will try to answer that succinctly, because I know the time is short, very succinctly. And secondly, what was the difference in Ontario between 2014 and 2018? How does that flow from what I'm talking about? So first of all, what then should independent labor politics look like? And how should we approach politics? From our perspective, we have to begin with the reality that unlike the 1940s, perhaps the 50s, or even into the 60s, we do not have a working class political party that is consistent and that can be relied upon to meet our interests. We do not, we can, if we did at one point, we are not prepared at this point to say that the labor movement and the social democratic political movement are one movement, because we have no recent experience to tell us that this is the case. So we actually support as strongly as possible coalition politics in Canada, knowing that if you look at Canada's welfare state, almost everything we have, from Medicare to pensions and so on, are not the product of any one political party. They were all done in the context, actually, many of them in minority governments in Canada, and required political actors from the center and the social democratic left to work together to accomplish those gains. So we are working very hard in this context to make for the political reference point for our members, not a political party, but their union. We want their union to be their political reference point. And I'm talking about on economic issues, on issues like trade, on social issues such as women's equality and equity and human rights. On all of these issues, we're trying to make their union their fundamental reference point, and then the union engaging in politics as a union independently, as vigorously as we can. And we are finding that we can have an impact when we act that way. And on the basis of that, to pull together the strongest progressive majority on each issue that advances a working class program. So that's my effort to explain to you what is our proposal. Now, the difference between 2014 and 2018, let me just make this shorter. In 2014, we had a extreme right-wing conservative party campaigning to end union security in this jurisdiction, also to fire hundreds of thousands of public servants and so on. we were able to make that their proposals, their anti-labor proposals, central issues, and we convinced a majority of the labor movement to engage in a process of strategic voting to defeat them. Okay? And we were successful. And that led to opportunities to go in a progressive direction. In 2018, we had achieved a certain level of progressive labor reforms. But unfortunately, our traditional allies in the social democratic movement had not contributed almost anything to those achievements, stood outside it. In fact, you know, let us be known that they really weren't interested in it very much at all because they thought the political benefit would go somewhere else. So they had not supported in any meaningful way. And it was very difficult, given that, to make these progressive gains for workers central to the political outcomes in 2018. Instead, we had a 15-year-old government that had corruption things attached to it and had been pounded on corruption issues by the Social Democrats as well as the Conservatives. And the Conservatives came along and also on social and cultural issues, sex education, anti-immigrant things, were able to, remember, they have a majority government, but they secured only 40% of the vote. And our best what we can figure out is that up to 40% of trade unions members also voted for them as well. And that's the difference between 2014 and 2018. What's the answer? The answer is to have more working people use as their political reference point their own union. Their own union. And for their own union to lead them towards better political outcomes.
Okay, thank you. Raoul, 1 minute.
I would just like to thank you all for accepting the task of trying to bridge the Atlantic with these themes that are recurring on both sides of the Atlantic, and these challenges are common to trade unions on both sides of the Atlantic for sure. And I've taken a lot of notes. I have been really benefiting from this. Once again, we have to avoid Marvin, the pessimistic robot. We want to create images of successful fights. Successes are important because they will inspire further successes. So whatever we do, let's try to win and go on. Thank you.
Thank you. And as a kind of dessert, that's the graph about the trade unions members in 15 years. So that's the beginning when I start as General Director of ETUI, and finishing in 2013 when I will be in pension, and we will have lost 20% of the members. That's the situation. So we spoke a lot about what kind of allies, but if we don't take that into consideration, it's whole Europe that we are missing the picture and the sense perhaps of urgency. If not in 2110, the last trade unionists will say goodbye. I close the light. So thank you all, and thank you for coming.